So today you're going to be working on a project that puts all of our transformations together. I'm going to explain through an example what you're going to be doing on this project, and then you're going to be working independently on creating your own figure and designing your project here. So on the left side of the screen here is the information sheet or the instruction sheet that you got with your project here. And on the right side is the sheet of graph paper, the example that I created. You will be creating your own design over here. So yours is going to look different than mine is, but I'm going to explain through my example over here. Now, first thing that you're going to want to do is on your graph paper, you want to create a full page coordinate plane. So your x-axis is going to go right in the middle and your y-axis is going to go right in the middle. Make sure you keep your paper portrait, so up and down, not landscape sideways, or your figure might not fit on the paper here. Now, once you have created your X and your Y axis, and if you haven't already done so, pause the video and go ahead and create that X and Y axis. Now, we have our X and Y axis drawn, so we're going to go through the steps here. Now, yours is going to be blank. Yours isn't going to look like mine. Now, just to give you kind of a heads up about this to start with, you are designing your own figure here. You cannot use the design that I've put here. This is the design that I'm using. You cannot copy this design. You've got to come up with your own. So if you use this design right here, you're not going to get credit for it because you've just copied my assignment. So make sure you come up with your own. So a couple things going through the instruction sheet that's on the left-hand side here, a couple things that we're going to talk about. First of all, we want to, it says, draw the shape of your choice in the center of the first quadrant. So one of the keys here is that your original shape has to be in the first quadrant. Now, our first quadrant is this quadrant up here in the top left or top right-hand corner, sorry. So what you are going to do is create some design in this upper right-hand corner, this first quadrant here. Now, you don't want it too far out because you're going to be translating this figure. You don't want it too close to the axes because you want to be able to rotate and reflect and do all those things. So you'll notice my original is the black one here, but you'll notice that I kept it kind of in this general area, a little bit away from the axis, but not too far out up here where I'm going off the paper with my design. So that's the first thing that you're going to do is create your design right here in the first quadrant. So like I said, my original is in black here. Now, the one kind of restriction that I have here, and let me actually underline it, is that it has to have at least 5 points on it. So you cannot draw a square or a rectangle in the first quadrant and try to transform that. That's not creative enough, and that's not really showing me that you know what you're doing. So you have to have at least 5 points on your figure. Obviously, you don't want to have 20 points on your figure because what you notice here is that you are listing out the coordinates every time you transform the figure. So if you have 20 points to your design, you're going to have to be transforming 20 points and finding the new coordinates of each one of those. So I would keep it somewhere around 5, a little bit more is okay. Mine here has 2, 4, 6, 7 points on it. So my design had 7, which is pretty reasonable. Now, once you have your design over here in the first quadrant, the first transformation that I ask you to do is a translation. So what you're going to be doing is you are going to be translating, which means sliding this figure using this rule right here. Now, if we think back to our translation rules, which we went over earlier in this module, remember that these numbers give us a set of directions. So I want to take my figure and I want to go -2 on the x-axis and I want to go +3 on the y-axis. So what I did was I turned these into a set of directions. -2 on the x-axis, if we're thinking about the x-axis, -2 is going to be to the left, and +3 on the y-axis is going to be up 3. So this is telling me I want to go left 2 and up 3. So all I did was turn that rule into a set of directions here. And what you will notice with my figure, I went from the black one here to the pink one here. Every point went left 2 and up 3, left 2 and up 3, and so on, all the way around. So all I did was take every point and move it left 2 and up 3. Now, once you have created your new figure, you are going to outline or color that in a different color here. And we are now working with this figure. We are never going back to the original. So when we get to step 3, we're going step 1 to step 2, and then step 2 to step 3. So I am going to transform that new pink arrow that I have there. Now, in step 3 here, I am now reflecting the figure over the x-axis. So we know that our x-axis is this line right here. So what I did was I created a mirror image of my figure down below the x-axis. So what I did was I figured out how many units each point was above the axis, and I went that same number of units below. So point G prime, for example, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units above. So I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units below and put my new point G. And I just did that with every single point. I counted how many units it was above the axis, and I went that same number of units below the axis, and that gave me my reflection here. So far we have figure 1 is the original. Figure 2 is the translation, and then figure 3 is the reflection. Now remember, I did not reflect my original, I reflected my new. So this is a composition, which means we are kind of adding on to our transformation. So step 1 to step 2, step 2 to step 3, and so on. Now, once I have my reflection taken care of, I'm going to go to and I'm changing my colors here, so just give me 1 second. I am going to go to my rotation. Now, step 4 asks me to rotate this figure 180 degrees about the origin. Now, we had a rule for our rotations, and I gave you this rule the other day. And our 180 degree rotation rule was every xy is going to transform to negative x, negative y. So what you need to know in order to do this rotation are the coordinates of this figure right here. Because remember, we're going from figure 1 to figure 2 to figure 3, and then we're going to take figure 3 and rotate it using this rule right here. So above, you should already have these coordinates written right here. And what you are going to do is you're going to change the signs on each one of your coordinates. So if they're positive, make your coordinates negative. If they're negative, make them positive. Now, on your coordinates here, because this figure ended up down here in the 4th quadrant, it's positive and negative. So when I change my signs, they're going to be negative and positive now. We're going to change both of them, so both of our signs change. So this figure, when I rotated it 180 degrees and changed both of those signs, ended up here in the 2nd quadrant, or the upper left-hand corner. So my new figure will end up here. Now, when you are rotating using the coordinates. You can't work with the coordinate plane as in counting over and up or reflecting, counting how many units. You have to actually plot the coordinates on the coordinate plane. So if this, let's start with point E right here. Point E was at positive 3, negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So positive 3, negative 5 for point E. When I rotated it 180 degrees, that became negative 3 and positive 5, which when I did negative 1, 2, 3, positive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is why E ended up right up here in the 1st quadrant, or the 2nd quadrant, excuse me. So we are working with our coordinates there. Now, our last transformation that we are going to do here, and again, I'm changing colors real quick, so just bear with me. Our last transformation that we are going to do is we are going to dilate our figure with a scale factor of 1/2. Now, our scale factor of 1/2 tells us that we are dividing everything by 2 here. So what we want to do is the coordinates that we found up here in our rotation, we want to take each coordinate and divide everything by 2. Divide the x by 2, divide the y by 2, divide the x by 2, divide the y by 2, and keep going point by point. Now, again, as we did with the rotations, we can't just look at the coordinate plane and determine what our new points are going to be. You have to actually write out the coordinates first and then put them on the coordinate plane over here. So what I did was I took every coordinate that I had here, divided it by 2, and then I graphed that on the coordinate plane here. So for example, using the same point that I used right here with this -3, 5 that I had, if I take -3, 5 and I divide everything by 2, I am going to end up with a decimal, but it's just a 0.5, so that's not a big deal. So dividing by 2, that would be -1.5 and 2.5. So I came to my coordinate plane, I went back -1.5 and up 2.5. So 1, 2.5, which is why point E ended up right here at -1.5 and +2.5. Now, as you are working through your project, this is going to require you doing a couple things. Number one, you're going to have to ask questions. So if you are struggling with part of this project, make sure you ask. Number two, the video is still on your iPad. So let's say you watched this whole video before you had even started your project and you forgot how to do one of the steps. Rewind to that point of the video and watch the explanation over. If you still don't understand, then ask. That's what we're here for. So make sure that you're not just not doing your project because you don't know how to do it. You've got to actually get that stuff done.